Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really fascinating, something you actually asked us to look into, the science of female sexuality. And we're using Emily Nagoski's fantastic book, Come As You Are, as our guide.
Yeah, it's a great source. Published back in 2015, but honestly, still so relevant. Nagoski, she's a top sex educator, researcher. You might know her from goodinbed.com or her blog, thedirtynormal.com.
Yeah.
It's full of science, but also just really validating.
Right, and that's kind of our mission for you listening today. We want to pull out the key takeaways from Come As You Are, cut through some of the noise and myths, and give you a clearer, science-backed way to think about sexuality, yours and others.
The core message really is, you're normal. Understanding the biology, the psychology, the social stuff, it unlocks a better sex life.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Nagoski starts by tackling this concept she calls men's sexuality light. What?
So,
What exactly is that?
well, it's this deep-seated idea historically in Western science and medicine that female sexuality is basically just a watered-down version of male sexuality.
Like, male is the default and female is less than.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, it's the original model, and anything different in women is seen as, I don't know, incomplete or maybe even malfunctioning.
Okay, and where does that idea really cause problems? Like in practical terms?
A huge one is orgasm during intercourse. Penis and vagina sex. The assumption was, well, men often orgasm that way, so women should too.
Right, and if they don't?
Then something's wrong with them. But the science, it just doesn't support that at all. The reality is only about 30%, just 0% of women reliably have orgasms from intercourse alone,
Only 30. Wow, so the other 70%.
are perfectly healthy and normal. They might orgasm sometimes that way, or rarely, or never. And that's okay. Women experience orgasm in, like, tons of different ways. Clitoral stimulation is key for most.
It's like we built this expectation based on a minority experience. And it wasn't just orgasm, right? This lead idea affected assumptions about physical arousal, too.
Exactly. There's also this assumption that, woman's genitals getting wet, for instance, should always perfectly mirror her mental state. Like she must be turned on emotionally if her body is responding.
Which is like the flip side of the assumption about men and erections, which also isn't always true.
Precisely. Our bodies and minds, they aren't always perfectly in sync. It's much more complex than that simple one-to-one connection.
Okay, that's a really important baseline to establish. Let's shift to anatomy then. Something that really blew my mind was this idea of homologous organs. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Homologous sex organs basically means that early on in the womb, before about 6 weeks, male and female genitals develop from the exact same set of tissues, like starting with the same basic hardware.
The same hardware. Seriously?
Seriously. Then hormones direct things down different paths,
Yeah.
but the underlying structures, they correspond.
Okay, give me some examples. This is wild.
Okay, so the clitoris, the whole thing, the glands you can see, but also all the internal erectile tissue that extends way back that entire structure is homologous to the penis.
The whole penis.
The whole penis.
Yeah.
And the clitoral hood, that's homologous to the foreskin.
Okay, I'm seeing it. What else?
There's the fourchette in women, that very sensitive bit of skin at the bottom edge of the vaginal opening. That corresponds to the male frenulum, that sensitive ridge on the underside of the penis head, sometimes called the Y spot.
So the parts lists are basically the same, just arranged differently.
In a way, yeah. And this leads to another key point Nagoski makes, the incredible diversity in vulvas. Labia size, shape, color. There's just a huge range.
And the message there is?
All of it is normal. All healthy. All beautiful. There's no single right way for a vulva to look, despite what media might sometimes imply.
That's so important to hear. Now, what about the hymen? That carries so much cultural weight.
Oh, the hymen is a perfect example of culture overriding biology. Scientifically speaking, it's mostly just a remnant of tissue from development. It's homologous to a tiny structure inside the male urethra, the seminal colliculus. It really has no biological function.
No function, but it's treated as this huge marker of...
Of virginity, exactly. Which itself isn't even a biological concept. It's a social construct, historically tied to controlling women's sexuality and property rights. People even get hymen reconstruction surgery, which just shows how powerful the cultural idea is, despite the biology.
Wow. That really drives home how much culture shapes our views. Okay, one more anatomy point. Skene's glands and the prostate.
Right, Skene's glands, they're near the urethral opening in women. And they are homologous to the male prostate.
How so? What do they do?
Well, like the prostate, they swell during arousal. This swelling in Skeen's glands is actually why some women might find it a bit difficult to pee right after an orgasm or intense arousal. The tissue is temporarily enlarged.
Fascinating. All these underlying connections. Okay, let's pivot to the brain. How does it actually manage sexual response? The book uses this dual control model, accelerators and brakes. Tell us about that.
This is such a useful metaphor, I think. The dual control model suggests your brain has two key systems for sexual response. There's the sexual excitation system, or SES, that's the accelerator, and the sexual inhibition system, or SIS. Those are the brakes.
Accelerator and brakes makes sense. So the accelerator gets pushed when?
When your brain detects anything it considers sexually relevant, that could be anything. Sights, sounds, smells, touch, fantasies, memories. Importantly, it's very much about what your brain has learned to associate with sex.
Learned. So it's not just instinct.
Not entirely. Experience plays a huge role. Nagoski mentions studies, even with rats, showing how quickly the brain connects neutral things like the smell of lemon or even a specific jacket in one study with sexual reward, turning them into accelerator cues.
Okay, so our turn-ons are partly learned. What about the brakes, though? What hits the brakes?
Anything your brain perceives as a potential threat or a reason not to be aroused right now. This is a huge category.
Like what kinds of things?
Oh, gosh. Worries about STIs, unwanted pregnancy, relationship conflict, feeling unsafe, general life stress, work pressure, kids interrupting.
Body image issues. Feeling self-conscious.
Absolutely. Negative body image is a big one. Worrying about whether you'll have an orgasm or if your partner is enjoying it. Nagoski gives this example, Lori, who had this whole list running through her head. Kids, messy house, or post-baby body, feeling disconnected from her partner, all hitting the brakes.
That sounds incredibly familiar for a lot of people, I bet. So difficulties with sex, they might not be about needing more accelerator.
Exactly. That's a key insight. Often, issues with desire or orgasm aren't because the accelerator isn't working, but because the brakes are being slammed on. Too much inhibition, not necessarily too little excitation.
So the focus should shift to what's
Yeah.
hitting the brakes.
Identifying those brakes and figuring out how to ease off them. It changes the whole approach from try harder to get turned on to what's getting in the way.
And people differ in how sensitive their accelerators and brakes are, naturally.
Yes, absolutely. Some people have a naturally high-revving accelerator and less sensitive brakes. Others might have super sensitive brakes and a more moderate accelerator. It's a spectrum. There's even a scale mentioned, the sexual inhibition scale, or SS.
SIS, what does that measure?
It basically gauges how sensitive someone's brakes are. How easily are they activated by potential turnoffs? People who score lower on SIS tend to worry less about things like performance anxiety or body image during sex.
And these sensitivities, they're not just innate, we learn them too.
Definitely. Just like the accelerator learns cues, the brakes learn what to react to based on our life experiences, past relationships, cultural messages, stressful events. There was research where if a virgin rat was repeatedly exposed to a female rat in heat but wasn't allowed to mate, its sexual behavior decreased later on. The brakes learned.
Wow, so experience really wires these systems. And the book notes girls might be more influenced by context.
Yeah, the social and emotional context seems to play a particularly strong role in how girls and women learn about and experience sex, influencing both the accelerator and the brakes.
Which brings us right back to context. You mentioned it earlier, how critical it is.
It's everything. The exact same physical touch can feel incredibly different depending on the context. Think about tickling.
Right. If you're happy and relaxed, it can be fun. If you're stressed or annoyed.
It's torture. Same sensation, totally different perception, because the context changed your brain's interpretation. Or think about smell as that cheese versus that body odor. Context tells you how to feel about it.
That's a great analogy. And Nagoski uses an example, Merritt, to show this with sex.
Yes, Merritt struggled with real-life sex, but found gay male BDSM erotic fiction intensely arousing. For her, the context of the fantasy bypassed her sensitive brakes in a way that real-life interactions didn't. It allowed her accelerator to engage freely. It highlights how specific contexts work for specific people.
Understanding your own context seems key. So this leads into another core idea. The one ring of enjoying, expecting, and eagerness. What's that about?
Think of the One Ring as like this central hub in the brain that processes all sorts of emotional responses up. Sex, yes, but also stress, love, disgust, you name it. It's not just one spot, but a network of brain areas working together. And it has three crucial components for understanding sex.
Enjoying, expecting, eagerness. Let's break them down. What's enjoying?
Enjoying is pretty straightforward. It's your brain's basic assessment. Does this feel good? Is this pleasant? It's the yes or no reaction to a stimulus. Simple pleasure or displeasure.
Okay. And expecting.
Expecting is about recognition. Your brain flags something as potentially relevant based on past experience or instinct. So in a sexual context, if something happens that your brain links to sex, a certain touch, a look, a word, the expecting system fires up.
And physical responses, like getting wet.
Nagoski argues that genital response lubrication, erection, is primarily driven by this expecting system. Your body is anticipating potential sexual activity. It's not necessarily about enjoyment yet.
Interesting. So expecting is the body getting ready. What about eagerness?
Eagerness is the motivation. It's the, ooh, I want more of that feeling. It kicks in when you're both expecting something potentially good and also enjoying it. Psychological arousal, feeling truly turned on in your mind, is basically expecting plus enjoying. That's what fuels the eagerness to continue.
Expecting plus enjoying equals eagerness. Got it. And these aren't always conscious choices.
Often not. These systems can fire automatically, beneath conscious awareness, based on cues and context.
Okay, so this ties back to context again. You mentioned stress and love are really powerful contextual factors. How do they plug into this?
Hugely. Your overall well-being, mental, physical, your relationship dynamic, the specific setting, it all forms the context that influences these enjoying, expecting, eagerness systems. Let's take stress. Nagoski talks about the stress response cycle. Fight, flight, or freeze.
Right, the classic response.
But the key point she makes is the importance of completing that cycle, letting your body physically release the built-up stress energy. If you don't, you can end up in a state of chronic stress, which absolutely slams the brakes on sexual pleasure and response.
Completing the cycle. How do we do that? We can't exactly run from a deadline like a deer runs from a predator.
No. But think about what that deer does after the threat is gone. It might shake violently, take deep breaths. It physically discharges the energy. We need ways to do that too. Exercise is a big one. Nagoski gives the example of Olivia, who used workouts. Physical activity, deep breathing, crying, sometimes even just allowing yourself to tremble or sigh deeply. It's about signaling to your body that the threat has passed.
But our culture often tells us to just suck it up, right? Don't show emotion.
Exactly. Which actively prevents us from completing the stress cycle. Dismissing emotions keeps that stress locked in, which is terrible for our overall health, including sexual health. She also mentions the tend and befriend response.
Tend and befriend.
Yeah, another stress response, particularly common in women apparently, involves seeking social connection, nurturing others, making alliances. It's another way of managing threat.
And what about severe stress, like trauma?
Sexual trauma, obviously, is a major stressor that can deeply impact the brakes and accelerator, sometimes for a long time. Healing often involves addressing it from different angles, top-down, like cognitive therapy, bottom-up through body-based or somatic work, and sideways with things like mindfulness.
Okay, so stress management is crucial. What about the love and connection side?
Attachment theory comes in here. Feeling secure and connected in your relationship is a hugely positive context. It helps turn off the brakes. Nagoski uses this lovely sleepy hedgehog analogy for handling difficult emotions in a relationship.
The sleepy hedgehog. Tell me more.
Imagine a difficult feeling. Anger, sadness, fear. It's like finding a little prickly sleepy hedgehog. Instead of poking it or ignoring it, you gently. 1, give it a name. Okay, this is anger. 2, sit with it. Just acknowledge it's there. 3, figure out what it needs. Why is it here? What triggered it? 4, communicate that need to your partner.
So it's about treating the emotion carefully and collaboratively.
Exactly. It avoids blame and focuses on understanding. Feeling lost or disconnected activates stress. Feeling connected, feeling home in the relationship, helps complete the stress cycle and creates safety.
That makes so much sense. Managing stress, fostering connection, huge contextual pieces. Now, let's talk culture. Nagoski calls cultural messages the weeds in your garden. What are the big ones?
She identifies 3 core negative messages about women's sexuality that are deeply embedded in Western culture. First, the moral message. You are evil. This links sex, especially female desire, with sin, shame, impurity. Think the Madonna whore complex.
Oh, yeah. Still pervasive. What's the second?
The medical message. You are diseased. This comes from that outdated men's sexuality light thinking. It treats female sexual responses that differ from the assumed male norm as medical problems or dysfunctions that need fixing. She gives an example of a doctor telling a woman her low desire was bad because it might prevent pregnancy.
Wow. Just completely missing the point of female sexuality beyond reproduction. And the third message?
The media message, you are inadequate. This is about the constant bombardment of unrealistic, often damaging portrayals of sex, bodies, and relationships in media. Think airbrushed perfection, effortless orgasms from intercourse alone, narrow definitions of beauty.
Yeah, that one feels inescapable sometimes, the comparison trap.
Totally. And it fuels rampant body self-criticism, especially for women. Nagoski is really clear. This constant negative internal commentary is toxic. It directly activates the brain's brakes, increases stress, reduces pleasure, and is linked to depression.
It's like constantly telling yourself you're doing it wrong. And she pushes back hard against the weight and health link too, right?
Yes, she powerfully debunks the myth that weight is a reliable measure of health. She shares a story about Kelly Coffey, who had bariatric surgery but realized her real issue wasn't weight, but a lack of self-respect. True well-being comes from treating yourself with kindness, regardless of size.
Self-respect is the foundation. I like that. And culture can also dictate what's considered good sex, right?
Yeah.
The yucking someone's yum idea.
Exactly. When society, or even just our parents, implicitly or explicitly signals that certain aspects of sexuality are gross or wrong, yucking your yum, it can create negative associations that hit the brakes later on. She contrasts two girls, Jessica and Teresa, who learned totally different things about arousal based on how their parents reacted.
So subtle messages have a big impact. What's the antidote?
Being conscious of the messages you consume. Nagoski calls it media nutrition. Pay attention to how the media you engage with makes you feel about your body and sex, and cultivate a you-do-you attitude.
You do you.
Yeah, respecting that what works for one person might not work for another. Don't impose your preferences. She uses food examples. Some people love beets, some hate fried food. Sex is similar. Huge variation in taste. Respect the differences.
Okay, weeding the cultural garden, media nutrition, you do you. Got it. All this complexity helps explain arousal non-concordance, right? That gap between body and mind.
Precisely. Arousal non-concordance is just the technical term for when your genitals respond, lubrication, swelling, but your brain isn't feeling turned on, or vice versa. Remember the expecting versus enjoying systems.
Right. Genital response is mostly expecting, anticipating potential sex. Subjective arousal needs enjoying, too.
Exactly. So your body might be saying, maybe sex is happening, while your brain is saying, nope, not feeling it. And the huge danger here is the myth that genital response always equals consent or enjoyment.
That's a really critical point for understanding consent.
Absolutely crucial. It leads to terrible misinterpretations. Someone might see physical signs and assume their partner is into it, even if the partner is saying no or clearly uncomfortable. Nagoski uses a scene from 50 Shades of Grey as an example of this harmful assumption playing out.
So we absolutely cannot rely on physical signs alone, and research backs this non-concordance up.
Definitely. Studies show women reporting low desire might still show physiological genital arousal in a lab setting when exposed to erotic stimuli. Their expecting system works, but their sensitive brakes, maybe due to context, stress, relationship issues, prevent the enjoying and eagerness from kicking in.
Which also explains why just targeting the physical response, like with those pink Viagra-type drugs, hasn't been very effective. They might boost the physical side, but don't address the brakes.
Exactly. They might slightly nudge the physiological response, but if the brakes are on hard because of stress or body image or relationship problems, it doesn't translate to subjective desire or enjoyment for most people. The context and the brakes are often the real issue.
So the key takeaway for someone experiencing this non-concordance is...
First, know you are healthy and whole. It's a normal human experience. Second, communicate clearly about what you're actually feeling, regardless of what your body seems to be doing. Third, focus on what does feel good, mentally and physically. Don't get hung up on the disconnect.
Good advice. Okay, let's talk directly about desire. How does it fit into this whole picture?
Nagoski defines desire quite simply. Desire is arousal in context. It's what happens when those brain-based arousal systems, expecting, enjoying, eagerness, meet a context that feels good, safe, and positive to you.
Arousal plus good context exceeds desire. Makes sense. And she talks about two types of desire.
Yes, spontaneous desire and responsive desire. Spontaneous is the kind that seems to just pop up out of nowhere, like a craving. Responsive desire is the kind that emerges in response to pleasure and stimulation within a positive context.
And one is more common than the other.
Responsive desire is actually much more common, especially for women, although both types are perfectly normal. Our culture tends to privilege spontaneous desire, though making people with responsive desire sometimes feel like something's wrong with them.
So you might not feel desire before sex starts, but it can build once things get going in the right way.
Exactly. An affectionate touch when you're relaxed and feeling connected might spark responsive desire. That same touch when you're stressed and feeling distant might just feel annoying. The context changes everything.
And understanding sex as an incentive motivation system is important here, too.
Yes, she argues sex isn't a drive like hunger or thirst that builds up and needs release. It's more like curiosity and incentive system. We're motivated to seek out potentially pleasurable experiences. This view really counters harmful ideas about sexual entitlement, particularly the myth that men have an uncontrollable drive.
Okay. And what about that little monitor she mentions again in relation to desire?
Ah, yes, the meta-emotion part. The little monitor is that part of your brain judging how you feel about how you feel. So you might have low desire, but the real suffering comes if your little monitor is saying, you should want sex more, this is bad.
The mismatch between how you feel and how you think you should feel, the criterion velocity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Often the problem isn't the level of desire itself, but the negative judgment about it.
And what about common explanations for low desire, like hormones?
Nagoski really challenges the hormone explanation, especially for women. While hormones play a role, research consistently shows that factors like developmental history, stress, trauma, relationship dynamics, mental health, and those negative cultural messages are far more significant drivers of low desire than just hormone levels.
So popping a hormone pill is unlikely to be a magic bullet.
Generally, no. The context and the breaks are usually much bigger factors. She also debunks the idea that monogamy inevitably kills desire, or that a chasing dynamic where one partner constantly pursues is healthy. It often just kills desire for the person being pursued.
Okay, so if it's not usually hormones, what can help increase desire? What are the strategies?
She offers three main evidence-based approaches. First, turn on the ons and turn off the offs, basically manage the brakes, stress, conflict, body worries, and activate the accelerator, pleasure, connection, positive context. She tells a funny story about a date night in a box that failed initially but worked when the focus shifted to genuine connection and fun.
So manage the context. What's the second?
Increase intensity. Sometimes novelty helps trying new things, creating exciting experiences together, especially like those heart rate raising activities common early in relationships. Also, allowing strong emotions, even anger sometimes, to run their course rather than suppressing them can, paradoxically, clear the way for desire.
Interesting. And the third?
Cultivate eagerness. This means consciously focusing on the pleasurable aspects of sex, being present in the moment and anticipating enjoyment. It's about leaning into the yes.
Turn on stern, off-offs, increase intensity, cultivate eagerness. And what if partners just have different levels of interest?
That's incredibly common and totally normal. The key is collaboration and communication, not pressure or guilt. The higher desire partner can help by offering affection without expecting sex, giving space, and understanding their partner's desire style. Embrace your own style, whether responsive or spontaneous, and create context that support it. Remember the garden metaphor, partners need to understand each other's unique gardens.
Great advice. Okay, let's move to the peak, so to speak, orgasm. Nagoski calls it ecstasy for everybody, but defines it quite broadly.
Yes, her definition is simply the sudden involuntary release of sexual tension. That's it.
What's important about what's not in that definition?
It doesn't mention specific genitals, muscle contractions, or even specific feelings of pleasure. It acknowledges the huge variability in how orgasm is experienced. It's not one single thing.
And non-concordance applies here too, body versus mind.
Absolutely. Just like with arousal, the physiological signs clinicians might measure for orgasm don't always align perfectly with a person's subjective experience of having had one. Orgasm is fundamentally a brain event.
And she challenges the idea that orgasm is always the absolute pinnacle of pleasure.
Right. Again, context matters.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's amazing. Sometimes it's just nice. Sometimes it might even be slightly annoying if the context is wrong, like being tickled. The value isn't objective. It's about whether you liked it and wanted it in that moment.
So less pressure on achieving some mythical, perfect orgasm.
Exactly. And particularly, less pressure on achieving orgasm through penis and vagina intercourse alone. That whole idea of the vaginal orgasm being superior is rooted in that old men as default thinking and linking sex solely to reproduction. Research suggests the primary evolutionary function of female orgasm is probably just pleasure.
Pleasure is the point. Revolutionary.
Yeah.
But difficulty with orgasm is a common issue.
Yes, orgasm distress is the second most common sexual concern women report after desire issues. But it's often very treatable, especially by understanding the accelerator brake model.
And she uses that flock metaphor for the brain during orgasm.
Yeah, it's a nice image. Think of all the different motivational and cognitive processes in your brain as birds in a flock. Sexual pleasure emerges from how these birds interact. Orgasm is like this strong magnetic pull to get there. The whole flock needs to align and fly towards it. That means turning on all the ons and turning off all the offs, coordinating everything.
Which explains why just taking a pill for orgasm is tricky.
Very tricky.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the specific sexual response systems. A drug would need to somehow influence your stress levels, your body image, your relationship feelings, your trauma history, all the things hitting the brakes or engaging the accelerator. It's incredibly complex.
Okay, so much of this comes back to how we feel about how we feel, that little monitor and meta emotions.
Yes, this is maybe the most crucial piece for overall sexual well-being and creating what she calls extraordinary sex.
Yeah.
Feeling okay about whatever you're feeling sexually, your desire level, your arousal, whether you orgasm is key.
And those three questions help cultivate positive meta emotions.
Right. Revisiting. 1. Is this the right goal for me? Maybe chasing spontaneous desire isn't right if you're responsive. 2. Am I putting in the right kind of effort? Maybe trying harder isn't the answer, but changing the context is. 3. Are my expectations realistic? Knowing only 30% orgasm from intercourse changes expectations.
Can you give examples of how people applied this?
She circles back to earlier stories. Lori learning to accept not wanting sex sometimes. Olivia finding ways to manage stress to allow for pleasure. Merritt embracing her unique turn-ons without judgment. It's about self-acceptance.
And the best meta emotion is non-judging.
Yes, it's not just being aware of your feelings, but adopting a non-judgmental stance towards them. She contrasts emotion coaching, seeing feelings as tunnels you pass through with emotion dismissing, seeing feelings as dangerous caves to be avoided. Non-judging is like being an emotion coach for yourself.
How do you practice that?
Remember, feelings are just biological cycles. They have a beginning, middle, and end. Get curious about them instead of instantly labeling them good or bad. Practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself like you would a friend.
She tells that story about Camilla and Henry and the no orgasm rule.
Yeah, that's a brilliant reverse psychology example. By taking the pressure off orgasm, changing the goal and expectations, they created a non-judgmental context focused purely on pleasure, which ironically made orgasm more likely. It shifted the whole dynamic.
So you can't choose your feelings, but you can choose how you relate to them.
Exactly. Choose compassion, choose patience. Feelings themselves aren't the problem. It's how we react to them and judge them.
And this ties into changing the kind of effort we put in and having realistic expectations.
Right. If one path isn't working, like trying to force spontaneous desire, find another path, like creating context for responsive desire. Use Nagoski's demotivator poster analogy. Find a different way up the mountain. Knowing the science, like that spontaneous desire is rarer, helps adjust expectations, that criterion velocity, so you're not constantly feeling like you fall short.
It all comes back to managing the context, turning on the ons, turning off the offs, weeding that cultural garden.
That's the most effective effort you can make, creating sex-positive context for yourself and your partner.
Okay, wrapping up. The book emphasizes belonging and having shared maps of sexuality. What's the final message there?
Feeling normal is fundamentally about feeling like you belong, like your experiences are valid and shared by others. When your internal map of sexuality, shaped by culture and myths, doesn't match your reality, it feels lonely and stressful. Unknown territory activates the stress response.
So the goal is to draw a better map.
Exactly, to create your own accurate, science-based, self-compassionate map of your unique sexuality. One grounded in understanding your accelerators, your brakes, your context, rather than those harmful cultural messages.
Okay. So the really big takeaway for you listening from this deep dive into Come As You Are is this. Understanding the science, your unique accelerators and brakes, how context and culture shape things, that understanding is power. It empowers you to create a sex life that feels good and joyful for you exactly as you are right now.
Beautifully put. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about one thing, just one aspect of your sexuality or your beliefs about sex that listening today has maybe challenged and made you question. Get curious about that. Explore it a bit further, but do it with kindness and self-compassion, because that ongoing learning, that self-discovery, that's really central to sexual well-being.